I'm not an expert in Hispanic heritage or the many diverse cultures across Latin America. But one pattern I've noticed, especially from those I've served with in the military, is the strong sense of cultural pride and identity. Nearly 19% of the U.S. population is Latino, and that same percentage is reflected in the active duty military. While cultural background is often left at the door once the uniform goes on, many service members still carry their traditions, beliefs, and stories with them. Among these stories, folklore stands out as something more than just entertainment. It's a connection to history, a way of teaching, and for many, a warning. My curiosity about Latin American legends began with conversations I had with fellow soldiers, especially one of my friends, Cesar, who moved to the U.S. from Venezuela and had also spent time in Panama. When I asked him about folklore, his response was casual, almost matter-of-fact. "Everyone has a chupacabra story," he said. He wasn't joking. These stories weren't just myths. They were treated like everyday facts in some communities. But then he mentioned something different, something more serious. He told me that across Latin America, people grow up hearing about a woman who cries near water. "If you hear her," he said, "stay away." It wasn't said for effect. It was a clear warning. That was the first time I heard about La Llorona. I didn't think much of it then. I assumed it was just another ghost story used to scare children. But over time, I realized this legend carried more weight than most. Unlike other myths that stay in childhood, La Llorona followed people into adulthood. Soldiers talked about her. Grown men admitted they were disturbed by the idea of her. This growing interest led me to dig deeper, not just into the legend itself, but into the experiences of those who claimed to have encountered her. What I found wasn't just superstition. It was a series of unsettling accounts, often from people who considered themselves rational, skeptical, and not easily frightened. Many were trained professionals, soldiers, law enforcement, and veterans, people not prone to panic or exaggeration. The stories were consistent. A woman crying near a body of water, usually late at night. A strange sense of dread that follows. Sometimes an unexplained incident shortly afterward. Accidents, injuries, even deaths. The deeper I looked, the more serious it seemed. And it all pointed to one chilling legend, La Llorona. This is not just a story about a ghost. It's about the power of belief, the grip of culture, and the strange events that defy explanation. In the sections that follow, I'll share first-hand accounts from American servicemen, explore the historical origins of the legend, and break down why La Llorona continues to haunt people today, no matter how far they are from home. In 2019, a U.S. Army National Guardsman was deployed to Soto Cano Air Base in Honduras for a temporary duty assignment. The base was quiet, mostly used for joint operations and training with local military forces. For most of his deployment, his job was routine. As one of the junior enlisted, he was placed on night shift. His responsibilities included monitoring logs, staying in radio contact, and patrolling the office building. It wasn't demanding. He spent much of the time catching up on shows and making coffee before the officers arrived. Then something strange happened. It began around 3 a.m., the time when the base was at its quietest. He started hearing what sounded like a woman crying outside. At first, he ignored it. A dog, maybe, a trick of the wind. But the sound came back every night, always at the same time. He couldn't explain it, but it didn't feel natural. It wasn't just soft weeping. It was deep, painful sobbing, as if someone had lost everything. Eventually, he wasn't the only one who heard it. Another non-commissioned officer joined him for some late-night operations, and he heard it too. They both admitted to being disturbed, though neither said it out loud at the time. After several nights of the same eerie crying, the NCO told him to go outside and check it out. The guardsman agreed, though reluctantly. He stepped outside around 3:15 a.m. and lit a cigarette to calm his nerves. The sobbing continued, but as he moved toward it, the sound seemed to move away. It was like it was leading him, pulling him farther from the building. He walked past the chicken coops, scanning the empty cabins. He expected to find someone, or at least an animal. There was nothing. He moved farther down the road toward a drainage pipe where the sound seemed to be coming from. Then, everything stopped. Not just the crying, all noise vanished. No insects, no wind, no background sounds at all. It was as if time froze. He stood there in complete silence, aware that something was off. A chill moved through him. His instincts, trained by years of discipline, told him to get out. He turned and ran back to the coops, hearing the chickens squawk at his sudden return. As he looked down the road, the crying resumed. But now it was behind him, not ahead. Nothing had changed visually. No figures, no movement. Just that haunting sound echoing again in the night. Back inside, his sergeant asked what he found. He gave a simple answer. Just chickens. They didn't log the incident, neither wanted to. Explain something they couldn't understand. Days later, the guardsman told the story to a friend back home during drill weekend. The friend, a Puerto Rican soldier, reacted with immediate concern. "If you heard a woman crying," he said, "someone's going to die." That's when he mentioned La Llorona, the weeping woman of legend. At first, the guardsman didn't believe in any of it. But what happened just a few nights later would force him to reconsider everything. Just days after hearing the unexplained sobbing outside his post in Honduras, the same guardsman was scheduled to take part in a night training exercise with a group of Marines. The operation involved sling-loading heavy cargo beneath helicopters, a task that required precision, coordination, and strict safety procedures. The exercise was set between 2:45 and 3 a.m., the same time he had been hearing the cries. During these types of exercises, one of the most important roles is the grounding man. Because helicopters generate static electricity through air friction, the aircraft must be grounded before anyone touches the metal hook to attach the load. If that static isn't discharged, the first person to make contact with the aircraft could be electrocuted. The grounding man uses a metal pole to safely discharge the static. Everyone knows the risk. If the grounding man loses grip or fails to do his job, people can die. That night, something went wrong. Due to unstable terrain and turbulence from the rotor wash, the grounding man couldn't get a good position. In a split second, he lost contact with the aircraft just as the guardsman stepped forward to hook the cargo. He didn't realize what had happened until it was almost too late. At the last moment, his sergeant grabbed the back of his plate carrier and yanked him backward. Both of them fell to the ground just as the helicopter dipped toward them. The blades hovered just inches from his head before pulling back up. If he had moved 1 second earlier, or if his sergeant hadn't been paying attention, he would have been crushed or electrocuted. Everyone on the team was rattled. The mistake could have been fatal. But for the guardsman, the timing of the incident disturbed him more than anything else. The near-death experience happened exactly around the same hour he had heard the crying woman for several nights before. The sound never came back after that. He began to connect the dots, whether he wanted to or not. First, the crying. Then, the eerie silence at the drainage pipe. And now, a close brush with death that only quick thinking had prevented. It all aligned with the warning his Puerto Rican friend had given him. If you hear her, something bad is going to happen. Back at the base, he didn't talk about the incident again. No one wanted to sound superstitious. In the military, strange stories are often met with jokes or drug tests. But the feeling stuck with him. The sense that something out there had tried to lure him away, isolate him, and possibly end his life. He didn't claim it was a ghost. He didn't say it was La Llorona. But he knew what he heard. And whatever it was, it felt real. It was enough to make a rational, disciplined soldier stop dismissing stories he used to laugh at. Something had been out there. Before enlisting in the Marine Corps, a young man took a trip to Mexico to visit his extended family. It was a farewell visit of sorts. His mother wanted him to reconnect with his roots before heading off to serve. He wasn't going alone. His pregnant girlfriend, who would later become his wife and then ex-wife, traveled with him. She was Caucasian, with blonde hair and hazel eyes, and her presence drew a lot of curiosity and attention in the small rural town where his grandmother lived. The first few days were filled with introductions and catching up. Family members gathered to meet the couple, and conversations stretched late into the night. At one point, one of his aunts, known for her interest in the paranormal, brought up the story of La Llorona. The moment the name was mentioned, his mother quickly tried to change the subject, clearly uncomfortable. She didn't want her son or his girlfriend caught up in old superstitions. But the Marine was curious. He pushed the aunt to continue. eager to hear the story. She explained that La Llorona was a weeping woman who wandered near rivers and lakes, mourning her lost children. According to the legend, if you heard her cry, it meant death was near, or that she might mistake you for one of her children and take you with her. His mother rolled her eyes at the tale, clearly dismissing it, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Later that night, the couple was offered a place to stay, his childhood home, which was currently under renovation. There were no working lights or interior doors, just a few candles and flashlights for illumination. They used a sheet as a makeshift barrier for privacy, even though they were the only ones inside. As the night went on, they talked, laughed, and eventually fell asleep. It was quiet, calm, uneventful, until something woke him up. He wasn't sure what time it was, but he noticed the covers had been pulled away from him. As he reached over to adjust them, he paused. From just outside the window above their heads, he heard a sound, long, drawn out, and distorted. A woman crying. At first he thought it might be an animal or someone playing a prank, but the sound had a strange quality to it. It wasn't just sad. It was broken, as if her voice had been damaged by years of screaming. It reminded him of an old gramophone recording, faint, scratchy, almost mechanical. Then he heard the words. In between sobs, she cried out, "Ay, mis hijos." Oh, my children. It was the exact phrase his aunt had mentioned earlier. The woman's cry was unmistakable, and it was getting louder. Slowly, the sound drew closer, echoing through the quiet night. His girlfriend stirred and asked, "What is that?" He didn't answer. He only motioned for her to stay quiet. She listened, and as the cries grew louder, fear took over. She started to tremble. He could feel her tears on his arm. They didn't dare move. The wailing continued for several minutes before it began to fade. But the night was not done with them yet. Just as they started to calm down, another sound erupted. Violent barking and growling directly outside the door. As the chilling cries of La Llorona faded into the distance, the Marine and his girlfriend finally began to relax, if only slightly. But that calm was short-lived. Out of nowhere, a violent commotion erupted just outside their front door. Loud snarling, barking, and the unmistakable sounds of a struggle broke the silence. Something, or someone, was fighting with tremendous force. The wooden door rattled in its frame, as if being slammed into repeatedly. The Marine immediately thought of the stray dog that had become attached to his girlfriend during their stay. The dog had been sleeping outside the house every night since they arrived, always greeting them in the morning with a wag of the tail. It had almost become their protector. Naturally, he assumed the dog was now in a fight, maybe with a wild animal or another stray. But this didn't sound like an ordinary dogfight. There was something vicious and unnatural about the way the door shook. It wasn't just scratching or scuffling. It sounded like something was trying to get in. The growls were deeper than anything he had heard before, filled with rage. The barking was high-pitched, desperate, like the dog was terrified and fighting for its life. Inside the house, the Marine and his girlfriend stayed frozen under the covers. Neither dared to move. Every second felt like an hour as the chaos outside continued. The Marine held her close, trying to keep her calm while suppressing his own fear. There were no weapons, no phone signal, and no real way to defend themselves if something forced its way through the door. After about a minute, the noise suddenly stopped. The silence was just as unsettling as the noise had been. No barking, no footsteps, no wind, nothing. They waited, afraid the slightest movement would provoke another outburst. Eventually, exhaustion won over fear, and they fell into a restless sleep. At sunrise, they stepped outside to investigate. The stray dog, always waiting for them each morning, was gone. There were signs of a struggle. Dirt had been kicked up, and paw prints were scattered around the door. Something had happened, but whatever it was had left no other trace. They searched for the dog throughout the rest of their trip, but it never returned. No one saw it again. The girlfriend, once a firm non-believer in anything paranormal, refused to talk about that night after they returned to the U.S. Anytime the Marine brought it up, she shut down the conversation. For her, it wasn't just a creepy story. It was a memory she wanted to forget. The Marine, though, remembered everything. From the moment the woman cried out, Ay, mis hijos. To the second the dog vanished, the experience stayed with him. He didn't have an explanation. But like the soldier in Honduras, he no longer dismissed the warnings. He believed they had come face to face with something old, something that had existed for centuries. La Llorona. Long before the name La Llorona became known across Latin America, a similar story was already rooted deep within the ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica. Some historians and anthropologists believe the legend may trace all the way back to the Aztec Empire, centuries before Spanish colonization. Among the most compelling connections is the Aztec goddess known as Cihuacóatl, whose name translates to snake woman, was a complex figure in Aztec mythology. She was both revered and feared. On one hand, she was seen as a goddess of fertility, childbirth, and motherhood. On the other, she carried darker associations, especially with death and sacrifice. She was often portrayed as a ghostly woman roaming at night, mourning her children. In some versions of the myth, she carried a cradle and would leave it behind. In the marketplace, when people opened it, they would find ritual objects associated with death or war, never a child. The parallels between Cihuacóatl and La Llorona are hard to ignore. Both are associated with sorrowful cries. Both are linked to lost or dead children, and both appear during the night, especially near water or sacred places. According to the Florentine Codex, a 16th century ethnographic work compiled by Spanish friar Bernardino de Sahagún, strange events began occurring in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan around the year 1509, roughly a decade before the Spanish conquest. People reported hearing a woman wailing through the streets at night. Her voice echoed through the darkness, crying out phrases such as, "My children, we must flee far away from the city," or, "Where shall I take you?" No one could find the source of the sound. Night after night the crying continued, and night after night the city searched in vain. Then, without warning, the cries stopped, just as abruptly as they had begun. Only years later, when the Spanish arrived and the empire fell to disease, warfare, and betrayal, did many realize the full weight of what they had heard. To the Aztecs, the mysterious woman's cries had not just been mourning, they had been a warning. In that sense, the figure known as Cihuacóatl was not just a goddess of motherhood, but also a harbinger of tragedy. Her appearance was often seen as an omen that death, especially that of children, was near. This ancient interpretation fits closely with the more modern versions of La Llorona. Though the names and details have shifted over time, the core message has remained unchanged. A woman in white, weeping for her children, appearing before tragedy. What makes this connection even more significant is the timing. The Aztecs heard the cries shortly before the fall of their empire. The Spanish brought with them more than weapons. They brought a wave of destruction that would reshape the entire continent. In this way, the crying woman was not just part of folklore. She became a symbol of irreversible loss, of children, culture, and identity. La Llorona may be known today as a ghost story used to keep children from wandering near rivers, but her roots lie in something far deeper. She is a remnant of ancient fears, passed down through generations, always mourning, always warning. In 1519, a decade after the mysterious cries were first reported in Tenochtitlan, the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés landed on the Yucatan Peninsula. What followed was one of the most brutal and significant conquests in history, the fall of the Aztec Empire. Cortés arrived with just over 500 soldiers, a handful of cavalry, a few cannons, and an ambitious plan. Outnumbered by the Aztecs, who ruled over millions and commanded an army of tens of thousands, he knew brute force alone wouldn't be enough. So, he turned to diplomacy and manipulation. Cortés forged alliances with smaller tribes who had suffered under Aztec domination. Many of these groups resented the empire's demand for tribute, and even more feared their people being taken for human sacrifices. By the time Cortés reached Tenochtitlan, his army had grown exponentially, not with Spaniards, but with native warriors who saw him as a tool to break free from Aztec control. In the final siege of the capital, it's estimated that over 240,000 people died, including civilians, defenders, and allies on both sides. And that wasn't the end. European diseases like smallpox, previously unknown in the Americas, spread rapidly through the population, killing millions in the years that followed. The cultural and human devastation was enormous. With the collapse of the Aztec Empire, temples were destroyed, languages were suppressed, and entire belief systems were dismantled. But some stories, like that of the Weeping Woman, survived. About 30 years after the fall of the empire, a Spanish friar named Bernardino de Sahagún began documenting the traditions and beliefs of the native people in a vast work known as the Florentine Codex. While interviewing indigenous elders and scholars, he frequently came across references to a ghostly woman who cried for her children, a spirit believed to appear before great suffering or disaster. Sahagún documented these stories with care, often without fully understanding their meaning. He wrote of a goddess who walked the markets by day and vanished without a trace, leaving behind a cradle. When others opened it, expecting a child, they found a flint knife, a weapon used in sacrificial rituals. The message was clear. This spirit was tied to death, especially the death of children. Over time, as Catholicism spread and indigenous beliefs were blended or suppressed, these stories changed shape. The figure of Cihuacóatl, once a goddess, then an omen, began to transform into something more ghost-like, more personal. The myth adapted to new cultures, but the sorrow and warning remained. By the 18th and 19th centuries, this ancient spirit had taken on a new name, La Llorona, the Eye, Weeping Woman. Now, instead of mourning all children, she mourned her own. Instead of walking the temples of Tenochtitlan, she was said to roam riverbanks and deserted roads. But her purpose stayed the same, to mourn loss and to warn of danger. La Llorona is more than just a folktale. She is a symbol that has survived conquests, cultural erasure, and centuries of change. And for those who still hear her cries today, she is not a myth at all. As the centuries passed, the image of La Llorona continued to evolve. What began as a goddess of motherhood and mourning in Aztec culture slowly became something more personal and more tragic. As the Spanish colonial influence spread across the Americas, the indigenous stories were not only preserved through oral tradition, but also began appearing in written form, often reinterpreted through the lens of Catholic morality and European literary styles. One of the earliest known written references to La Llorona appeared in a poem published in 1849 by Manuel Carpio, a Mexican writer and physician. The poem, simply titled La Llorona, told the story of a woman named Rosalia, who had been murdered by her husband. After her death, it was said that her ghost returned, wandering the streets and crying out in anguish. Carpio's version is particularly significant because it helped shift the legend from a vague supernatural omen into a focused narrative, a wronged woman, unjustly killed, who could not find peace. His depiction emphasized grief, betrayal, and unresolved suffering, themes that resonated deeply with readers during the time. In the poem, Carpio described how, in the darkness of night, people heard a woman's cries. Her presence filled the streets with fear. She walked alone, cloaked in shadow, weeping for what she had lost. There was no mention of drowned children in this early version, but the emotional foundation of the modern legend was clearly present. A woman who died in pain and whose spirit returned, restless and mourning. This literary portrayal may have been inspired by earlier oral versions of the tale, or may have helped formalize what had already existed in popular culture. Either way, it gave La Llorona a name, a backstory, and a more human identity. She was no longer just a mysterious figure warning of disaster. She became the main character in a personal tragedy. Following Carpio's work, other writers, folklorists, and historians began collecting versions of the legend from across Mexico and other parts of Latin America. What they found was striking. Though the details often varied, the core elements remained the same. A woman in white, crying for her children, often near water, and always linked to death, sorrow, or loss. In many regional versions, La Llorona was said to be a mother who drowned her children, either out of revenge, desperation, or madness, and then killed herself. As punishment, she was cursed to wander the earth forever, searching for their souls. In some tellings, she steals away children who are out late at night. In others, She brings misfortune to anyone who hears her wails. Despite the variations, her role as a cautionary figure stayed consistent. Parents used the story to keep children from wandering near rivers or staying out after dark. The legend became a cultural tool, passed from generation to generation, not just to entertain, but to warn. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, La Llorona was no longer confined to indigenous stories or local myths. She had become a central figure in Latin American folklore, recognized across national borders, rural towns, and urban centers alike. She had moved from myth to literature to lived memory. And in doing so, she became one of the most enduring and chilling legends in the Western Hemisphere. Among all the variations of La Llorona's tale, one version has become the most widely told and recognized across Latin America, and even parts of the southern United States. It centers around a woman named Luisa, whose story is rooted in the colonial era, a time when Spanish nobles held power and strict social divisions controlled who could marry whom. Luisa was a beautiful young woman, but she came from a poor family. She caught the eye of Don Nuño de Montes Claros, a wealthy Spanish nobleman who was captivated by her beauty and grace. Though social rules forbade nobles from marrying commoners, their feelings grew strong. Eventually, they were married in secret. For a time, they lived quietly, away from society, and Luisa gave birth to 3 children. Don Nuño visited them in secret, often disguised as a laborer to avoid drawing attention. But over time, his visits became less frequent. When a noblewoman from Spain arrived in town, Don Nuño's loyalty began to waver. He saw an opportunity to elevate his status through an official marriage that would be socially and politically acceptable. Luisa noticed the change in him. His absences grew longer, his affection diminished, and rumors began to spread. One day, while walking through town, she overheard women gossiping about Don Nuño's upcoming marriage to the noblewoman from Madrid. At first, she refused to believe it. But to see the truth for herself, she went to the estate where the wedding was being held. Hidden in the shadows, she watched her husband raise a glass in celebration, not with her, but with the woman he had chosen to replace her. In that moment, everything she had built, her family, her love, her future, collapsed. What happened next has been interpreted in many ways, but the outcome remains the same in nearly every version. Luisa returned home to her children, devastated and betrayed. In a fit of rage, sorrow, and despair, she took the lives of her 3 children. Some say she stabbed them. Others say she led them to the river and drowned them, a version that has become the most iconic. Immediately afterward, realizing the horror of what she had done, she attempted to take her own life. Some say she succeeded, others say she was arrested and executed. Either way, her death did not bring peace. According to legend, Luisa's spirit was cursed to roam the earth, especially near bodies of water, endlessly searching for the souls of her children. Her cries, "Ay, mis hijos," "Oh, my children," echo through the night, a mix of sorrow, madness, and guilt. She became known as La Llorona, the weeping woman. This version of the legend carries powerful themes: the danger of unchecked emotion, the pain of betrayal, and the consequences of vengeance. But more than anything, it's a story of loss and punishment, of a mother whose love turned into destruction. For generations, this tale has been used to teach children about the consequences of disobedience and the importance of returning home before dark. But for many, it's more than a cautionary story. It's a warning rooted in something older and deeper. Those who believe in La Llorona don't just fear hearing her, they fear what comes next. The legend of Luisa may have begun as a localized tale, but over time, it became the defining version of La Llorona's story. It is this version that most people know today. And it is this version that continues to inspire fear, fascination, and mystery. By now, La Llorona is more than a ghost story whispered at bedtime. She is a deeply embedded part of Latin American cultural identity. Her name alone is enough to stir fear and familiarity across communities from Mexico to Argentina, and even among Latino populations in the United States. Regardless of regional variations, her presence is instantly recognized. Ask anyone raised in a Latino household, and chances are they've heard her story from a parent, grandparent, or family friend. Some were warned not to stay out past dark. Others were told not to wander near rivers or lakes. Often it wasn't just a story to entertain. It was used as a form of discipline, a way to enforce caution. What makes La Llorona so enduring is her emotional complexity. She is not just a monster. She is not a mindless spirit. She is a symbol of grief, guilt, and eternal punishment. That emotional depth is what gives the legend power. People don't just fear her. They pity her, relate to her, or at least understand the pain that drives her cries. Unlike many legends that remain static, La Llorona has evolved over time while staying rooted in the same central idea. A woman who lost her children and is now cursed to search for them forever. In some versions, she's portrayed as evil and dangerous, a spirit who actively seeks to harm others. In others, she's tragic and sorrowful, more to be mourned than feared. But in every version, her presence is considered a bad omen, especially if her cries are heard nearby. Interestingly, the myth even has variations in interpretation depending on how close or far away her voice seems. According to common belief, if you hear her cries nearby, she may actually be far away. But if her cries sound faint or distant, it may mean she's close. This contradictory nature adds to the fear, making it hard to know whether you're safe or already being watched. La Llorona's reach has also extended into mainstream media, especially in the last few decades. She's appeared in films, television, literature, and even video games. But despite these modern interpretations, her most powerful form remains the one passed down through oral tradition. It's in the quiet conversations, the hushed warnings, and the stories told during storms or blackouts that her legend remains strongest. For many, belief in La Llorona is not about ghosts or the supernatural. It's about respect. Respect for the culture, for the stories of elders, and for the mysteries that can't easily be explained. It's about understanding that some things stay with us, not because they're proven, but because they are deeply felt. Even those who say they don't believe in her often avoid joking about her or speaking her name casually. In certain households, especially among older generations, it's considered disrespectful to treat her story as entertainment. To them, La Llorona is not a myth. She is a presence, one that deserves to be acknowledged with seriousness. In a world filled with distractions, changing beliefs, and forgotten traditions, the legend of La Llorona remains a rare constant. She walks the line between the spiritual and the cultural, between a warning and a memory. And for those who have heard her cry firsthand, there's no doubt, she's real enough. The stories shared by the two servicemen, one from Honduras, the other from Mexico, are not isolated incidents. They represent a larger pattern, a quiet truth known by many in uniform. Strange things happen on deployment. Whether it's the isolation, the unfamiliar landscapes, or the intensity of the work, those who serve often witness things they can't explain. But in the military, there's an unwritten rule. Don't talk too much about the weird stuff. If you claim to see something unexplainable, especially something supernatural, it risks your credibility. There's always the chance your story gets dismissed as stress, fatigue, or worse, the kind of thing that earns you a drug test or a psych evaluation. So many keep silent, laugh it off, or only share their stories with those they trust. That's why the soldier stationed in Honduras didn't write the incident in the logbook. He didn't talk about the crying woman again until he was home, and even then, it took a few drinks and a close friend to get him to open up. When he did, his Puerto Rican buddy didn't laugh. Instead, he responded with immediate seriousness. "You didn't hear a woman crying, man, because if you did, someone's going to die." That kind of reaction is common among those raised in Hispanic communities. La Llorona isn't treated as a joke or a ghost story. It's a real warning, passed down through generations. And for that soldier, the legend almost became literal truth when he nearly died during a night training operation just days later. Why? Marine's experience in Mexico was no less intense. What began as a cultural visit to see family turned into a night of fear and uncertainty that neither he nor his girlfriend ever forgot. They heard the cries. They saw the reaction of animals. They felt the presence of something they couldn't see. After that night, the stray dog that had loyally guarded their door vanished without a trace. These are not men prone to fear. These are trained professionals, people who have dealt with real danger, real violence, and high-stress environments. Their stories aren't fueled by superstition. In fact, both initially approached the legend with skepticism. It was only after the experiences that their attitudes shifted, and that's the most unsettling part. La Llorona's presence doesn't ask for belief. She doesn't need her name to be known or her story to be shared. She exists in moments, in sounds, in silences, in timing that feels too precise to ignore. Whether she is a spirit, a legend, or a cultural echo, the result is the same. Those who hear her are never quite the same afterward. Among soldiers, few things are feared more than the unknown. And La Llorona represents exactly that, a force, without a face, a voice without a body, a legend that refuses to die. The legend of La Llorona has survived centuries, empires, and borders. From the ancient streets of Tenochtitlan to the quiet shadows of rural Mexico, from the watchposts of Honduran military bases to the homes of families across Latin America, her story has never truly faded. Some call her a ghost. Others believe she's a divine warning. A few say she's a twisted mix of both, part myth, part memory, and part punishment. But no matter which version you hear, one thing remains the same. Her cry means something. Whether it's a child warned not to stray too far from the river, or a soldier pulled back from the edge of death, La Llorona's presence lingers in the moments when silence becomes too quiet, when fear feels too familiar, and when you sense something watching but see nothing there. What makes her story so powerful is not just the horror, but the truth inside the fiction. Every culture has stories like this. Spirits that mourn, warnings dressed as women, nighttime voices that speak when no one else does. But La Llorona is more than that. She's a mirror, a reflection of grief, regret, and what happens when love turns to despair, and perhaps that's why her story continues to matter, not because of what she is, but because of what she represents. So the next time you hear crying near a body of water, especially when the night is still and the wind feels heavier than usual, don't just assume it's nothing. Listen carefully. Pay attention to what follows. And if you've had an experience of your own, whether you believe in her or not, drop it in the comments below. I want to hear your story, and so does this community. If you found this story compelling, disturbing, or thought-provoking, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next deep dive into folklore, mystery, and the unexplained. And tap the bell icon so you're first to know when a new story goes live. Every comment, like, and share helps keep legends like this alive, and helps us uncover even more chilling stories that walk the line between truth and terror. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay curious, and if you ever hear someone crying in the dark, maybe don't go looking.